Hi, welcome to Myers ASMR. It's so good to see you. I'm always glad to see you. Relax, relax. Shake that mess and that stress off. It was not personal, and they did not mean it. You are loved and supported. Hey, look what I got today. My boyfriend was playing music last night at this fancy upscale seafood spot in Paramus, New Jersey, and these are the leftover Brussels sprouts. So they were very good, but it was an appetizer, but it was like the size of a meal, which I really do appreciate. Large portions, because that means the next day I don't have to cook as much. Isn't that great? Anyways, let's just dig in. They put cashews. The sauce tastes a little bit like teriyaki. It's got sesame seeds on it. Oops. I love cashews too. This is still a lot of Brussels. I don't even know if I'm going to get through this right now. You know, Brussels sprouts really have to be made well because they're so bitter. I also picked up some marinated chicken cutlets from Whole Foods. Oops, I'm just spilling it with lemon pepper. And all you had to do was pop them in the oven, which I did. So I'm very eager to taste this. So let me do that now. After I clean up. You know, I like leaving these little bloopers in the video because they just show the realness, that's all. You know, there are moments when we're all unpolished and make little mistakes and whatnot. So anyways, it looks incredible, doesn't it? I love a well-seasoned, juicy piece of meat. I'm trying to eat around the fat. That's good. Not too salty. You know what? I am so sorry. I forgot to use my plastic fork. Hopefully I'm not banging too much with this one. This is some tender stuff. I absolutely love it. I think it's the lemon juice that really tenderizes it. And the fact that it was soaking in the marinade for so long. Yeah, that makes meat really, really soft and tender. And super juicy. I mean, I didn't even put a cover on it when I cooked it, when I baked it. It was pretty much swimming in the sauce. boyfriend loves calling me a foodie as if he's accusing me of something. As if a person is not supposed to admit that they love to eat. He loves to eat. Most people do. It's usually a drive that is just present. And we have no choice. You know, we feel hungry at times. It's just that simple. And hunger prompts the motivation to satisfy the desire. I just admit to it, and I have fun with it. And I enjoy it, and a lot of people do. You know, we've got to get rid of this stigma of not taking pleasure in our food and feeling guilty and all of that. Look, I go to the gym. You know, I try to watch what I eat. Yes, I could lose some pounds. I really could, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to enjoy food. Food has opened up new worlds to me. Food has taken me into some wonderful, beautiful places and spaces that I would have never seen. I mean, I have traveled for food. And when I say traveled, I mean within my local area. Like, I live in the New York City area, so this place is a foodie destination. And I think when you grow up here, there's this appreciation because it's a real sport here. I mean, it's such a part of the culture. I mean, I don't even think it's possible to eat in every establishment in New York City, because every time you turn around, there's something new popping up. So, and there's so many restaurants that have such ambiance and atmosphere. I mean, just spectacularly done with the scenery, the architecture, the decor, the food. It's just, when it all comes together like that, that is the most satisfying experience. And then when you top it off with some entertainment, like a show, then the evening is perfect, in my opinion. I am thirsty. Yes, delicious. Oh my goodness, I just love my teas. This one is from Tazo, which makes some very delicious, rich teas. It's called Orange Passion, I think. Orange Passion. And I squeezed a lime into it. So, give it some citrus, vitamin C. Usually, I don't sweeten my teas. I don't think it's necessary. Usually in the morning I have a smoothie, which of course has its own sweetness. So, usually leave my teas unsweetened. But lately I've been adding this blackberry concentrate to my teas, and that's a little sweet, but I just use a tiny, maybe a quarter of it, maybe half a teaspoon, so it doesn't really make it sweet. Yes, this is so good. I love citrus. I think that's why I like certain certain ciders so much. Like that Stella cider has some citrus hints. I'm convinced they put lemon in it because that thing is the best to me. Well, it's time for the next fun part of the video where we get to actually, I normally say we get to focus on getting better and better every day in every way, because usually I'm reading a self-help or self-improvement type of book, but I picked up The Great Gatsby because I want to read some great literature. So let's pick up. I'm still on the beginning. I'm still on chapter 1. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in the delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, "Why, yes." With very grave, hesitant faces, Father agreed to finance me for a year. And after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city. But it was a warm season, and I had just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. He found the house a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow at $80 a month. But at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. I had a dog, at least. I had him for a few days until he ran away. And an old Dodge and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped me on the road. "How do you get to West Egg Village?" he asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. And so with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Maecenas knew. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college. One year I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News. And now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again that most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window. After all, It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay just out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They are not perfect ovals like the egg in the Columbus story. They are both crushed flat at the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular, except shape and size. Doesn't that paint a nice picture? I'm from New Jersey, and I've spent a lot of time in New York, but there's certain parts that I'm not too familiar with. I mean, most of us, of course, we know Manhattan very well. I've worked in Manhattan. I even worked in Westchester. I visited Long Island a couple of times. So I like when I can read something about those areas and find out more, because I'm not very familiar with certain parts of New York, so I just find it fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two, though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for $12,000 or $15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month. Across the courtesy bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water, and the history of the summer really begins on the evening I drove over there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin, once removed, and I'd known Tom in college, and just after the war I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure in a way, one of those men who reached such an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything afterward savors of anticlimax. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom with money was a matter for reproach, but now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. Why they came east, I don't know. They had spent a year in France for no particular reason, and then drifted here and there unrestfully wherever people played polo and were rich together. This was a permanent move, said Daisy over the telephone, but I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking, a little wistfully, for the dramatic turbulence of some irrevocable football game. Wow, this is fantastic writing, isn't it? I just love it. And so it happened that on a warm, windy evening, I drove over to East Egg to see two old friends who I scarcely knew at all. Their house was even more elaborate than I expected, a cheerful red and white Georgian colonial mansion overlooking the bay. The lawn started at the beach and ran toward the front door for a quarter of a mile, jumping over sundials and brick walls and burning gardens. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines as though from the momentum of its run. The front was broken by a line of French windows glowing now with reflected golden wide open to the warm, windy afternoon. And Tom Buchanan in riding clothes was standing with his legs apart on the front porch. He had changed since his New Haven years. Now he was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with a rather hard mouth and a supercilious manner. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body. He seemed to fill those glistening boots until he strained the top lacing, and you could see a great pack of muscles shifting when his shoulder moved under his thin coat. It was a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body. His speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, added to the impression of fractiousness he conveyed. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, even toward people he liked. And there were men at New Haven who had hated his guts. Now, don't think my opinion on these matters is final, he seemed to say, just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are. We were in the same senior society, and while we were never intimate, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own. We talked for a few minutes on the sunny porch. I've got a nice place here, he said, his eyes flashing about restlessly. Turning me around by one arm, he moved a broad, flat hand along the front vista, including in its sweep a sunken Italian garden, a half-acre of deep pungent roses, and a snub-nosed motorboat that bumped the tide offshore. It belonged to Domain, the oil man. He turned me around again politely and abruptly. We'll go inside. We walked through the high hallway into a bright, rosy-colored space fragilely bound into the house by French windows at either end. The windows were ajar and gleaming white against the fresh grass outside that seemed to grow a little way into the house. A breeze blew through the room, blew curtains in at one end and out the other like pale flags, twisting them up toward the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling, and then rippled over the wine-colored rug, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. They were both in white, and their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. I must have stood for a few moments listening to the whip and snap of the curtains and the groan of a picture on the wall. Then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows, and the caught wind died out about the room and the windows and the curtains and the rugs, and the two young women ballooned slowly to the floor. The younger of the two was a stranger to me. She was extended full length at her end of the divan, completely motionless, and with her chin raised a little as if she were balancing something on it, which was quite likely to fall. If she saw me out the corner of her eye, she gave no hint of it. Indeed, I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. The other girl, Daisy, made an attempt to rise. She leaned slightly forward with a conscientious expression, then she laughed an absurd, charming little laugh, and I laughed too and came forward into the room. I'm paralyzed with happiness. She laughed again, as if she said something very witty, and held my hand for a moment, looking up into my face, promising that there was no one in the world she so much wanted to see. That was a way she had. She hinted in a murmur that the surname of the balancing girl was Baker. I've heard it said that Daisy's murmur was only to make people lean toward her, an irrelevant criticism that made it no less charming. That's just delicious. I love good stories. They give me something to think about, something to imagine. I'm gonna stop there. I could really go on and on. I didn't expect it. Actually, I did expect it to be this fascinating, because this is one of the great books that is on, many people's reading lists. Hey, remember that you're loved and supported. You're loved and supported. If you like what I'm doing here, like and subscribe. Donate to the channel. Catch me in the next video.